Have you ever wondered how the pros draw these incredibly stylized anime eyes? Well, in this video, I'll find out exactly how these 5 artists draw them, whether it's the graphic and punchy look, soft and melancholic, or the classic anime gem-like eyes. I'll cover all the styles, but first I'll quickly nail down some basic anatomy to give you guys the ultimate formula to draw perfect eyes every single time. Let's go. Quick thanks for today's sponsor, Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for creatives and entrepreneurs. Like I mentioned earlier, let me quickly explain a few key fundamentals about eye anatomy using examples from the 5 artists, so we don't end up blindly copying style techniques, but also learn how to apply them in your own unique style later. No matter how crazy these eyes look on the surface, great artists will still always have these same 5 characteristics that clearly show the eyeballs sitting inside of a socket. And honestly, this is probably the only core anatomy idea you need to keep an eye out for. Most styles out there will always show this rounded bone structure around the eye sockets. As you can see here, the edges here always round as we get to the outer ends of the eye. This is probably the most important feature you need to keep in mind because it directly shows your understanding of the form of the face. The indent of the brow ridge here is also pretty important since it's part of the bone structure, especially for more manly looking characters. This is why there's always that cast shadow there at the inner corners of the eyes. But if you're the type of artist that exclusively draws cute anime girls, I wouldn't worry too much about it since that region is a lot flatter, sometimes even non-existent. The next 3 features involves the eyelashes, and I think of the eyelashes as the frame for the irises. Because they directly show the structure of the eyes overall, they're also important to get right, especially at different angles, which we'll also talk about later. The first thing you'll notice about eyelashes is the angle of the curve is quite important. This actually expresses the personality of the character the most. I talked about this extensively in my other videos, so make sure to check them out. The eyelashes also cast shadows, and adding this detail really boosts the believability of your drawings. Some artists like to emphasize the shape of the cast shadow like this, more so if they have really exaggerated eyelashes. It's just more convincing to have a cast shadow like this rather than a plain straight one. And the last feature are the reflections in the eyeballs, not just the iris but on the whites as well. These things are moist, so naturally they reflect a ton of light. This is also one of the key aspects to getting that sparkly anime eye right, which we'll talk about more towards the end. Now that we're done with the easy part, let's move on to the real test of your knowledge. If you're the person that struggles to get the other eye in or spends hours adjusting both eyes to match perspective, then you need to watch this. Here I'll show you some really easy drills you can do to nail the perspective every time. You want to practice doing top-down angles, bottom-up angles, and angles when the head turns to the side. Using this really simplified shape, I gradually rotated the shapes around the different axes just to get myself more comfortable drawing them in different angles. The one thing I'm keeping in mind here is the socket thing and the curve. You see that it becomes more apparent as you turn the head to more of a 45-degree angle. If you're not comfortable with doing this yet, you can try tracing first, like what I'm doing here. Just keep the lines really simplified, then use that as a base, rotate them by just a little bit each time. Using it alongside a 3D model also helps a lot. In Clip Studio, I lowered the opacity and rotated the model gradually so that I can keep track of the head rotation instead of having to do it directly in my brain. And then there's movement. The eyes are one of the 3 places that contributes to various facial expressions. I don't think I need to explain the various facial expressions since that should be intuitive enough for you guys. But here I want to point out the common mistakes I personally made when studying these artists. First of all, I know this should be painfully obvious, but there should be space when the upper eyelids move like this. I often make the mistake of drawing the eyes too close to the brow when they're half closed like this. This makes the eyes look like they're in the normal, fully open state, which one messes up the expression I was going for, and it makes the eye seem smaller than it should be. Another mistake is when a character is smiling, the bottom eyelid should curve up a little more, creating the eye smile. This is because the cheeks push upwards into the eyes when we smile. This happens even though the character is only smiling slightly. Otherwise, the smile will often look fake and not expressive without it. Another scenario this will happen is when we look at the character from a lower angle. If we tilt the model like this, you'll see that there's natural end curve at the bottom of the eyes. And just a quick side note about eye shapes. For the longest time, I've had this question about the oval irises you see in anime style. This video here kind of explains why they are the way they are, but just keep in mind that realistic eyeballs are spheres. But this actually expands the room for stylization, which we'll talk about in a second, since just the shape of the eyes already offers you a ton of customization. I will show you some really common eye shapes that a lot of artists use here, and that was structure, but it's only half of the equation. Rendering is what makes the final result impactful. And by using this 4-step system, anyone can easily draw a pair of convincing anime eyes. A few adjustments here and there, plus adding some extra twists, you can get pretty much infinite variations of style, just like these 5 artists. In terms of layering, the most basic one of them is probably Tsuki. Now, this doesn't mean that it's bad in any way. If anything, Tsuki's ability to make the eyes look so good with so little is what we should all strive for here. Tsuki's style really highlights the importance of structure here, because that will basically carry a lot of the drawing. If you don't have a solid structure and perspective, no matter how much effort you put into the rendering, it'll still look bad. With that being said, let's go deeper here and look at the rendering steps one by one, while comparing how each of the 5 artists approach them. But before we jump into stylization, a quick thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a stunning website, whether you're showcasing your art portfolio, offering commissions, or launching an entire brand. With these beautiful templates and built-in tools for selling products, blogging, or running memberships, it makes building your online presence effortless. If you're a tech dummy like me, then good news, because you don't need to know a single line of code. Just drag, drop, and click buttons. Whether you're into fan art, concept art, or full-on merch drops, you can make a professional site that actually reflects your style. Head to my link in the description to start your 14-day free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use my code RICEBRUSH to save 10% off your first purchase. Now, the first step is to set up the frame for the eyes. From here, we can see how each artist have their own way of doing the eyelashes. Tsuki's eyelashes are actually one of the fancier ones we'll see here. There's a base layer behind here, which is faded out slightly with a weaker tone. Then on top of this, there's a second layer of lashes that pops out more like this, with darker and more contrasty colors. Ame 999 actually has a similar setup, just with some extra steps. There's that same first layer here that's a little faded out. Actually, I think that's like makeup. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, on top of that, we have the same lashes that sticks out like this, but they're more refined compared to Tsuki's. More individual strands poking out like this. And these are a perfect opportunity to add in those juicy highlights, because the lashes catches light very easily. But no matter if the lashes are very detail heavy like Ame and Tsuki's, or if they're simpler like Wanke, and Chloe? I'm just gonna call her Chloe. These names, man, these names. There's always that same faded ends with red tips, which you can do easily with an airbrush after locking the opacity. Chloe added in the highlights and the reds in the lashes using a rake texture brush like this, which is a quick and easy way to add details in. And unlike all of the other artists, Wanke actually treats the bottom lashes with respect. Wanke has a more balanced proportion between the upper and bottom lashes. Usually in anime styles, the bottom lashes are smaller and less noticeable, but Wanke's bottom lashes are more complete, with reddish eye bags underneath for that goth mommy look. Ooh la la! And finally, Lamb is just built different because all of the points mentioned above are somehow done in all of Lamb's work. On top of that, the anatomy details are more complete in the eyes overall. I will note that Lamb's brushwork is a lot more rough for the eyes, giving it that graphic, wild look. Now, okay, here's really the main part of the show. A lot of the stylization in eyes comes from the iris, because it's the main focal point of the whole face, and it's usually more rendering intensive. There are 3 parts to the iris: the outer ring, the middle part, and the pupils. Outer ring is usually just line art, but Tsuki's are a bit on the thicker side compared to the others. They are often slightly blurred as well, and this softens the edge and gives the eyes a bit more of a natural look. Yes, even if you're doing the anime style, I think this is a good technique, because you really don't want the contrast to be too strong there. I have to note that Tsuki uses low contrast analogous colors for the iris, as you can see here, and this is the main reason the eyes look so comfy and dreamy. Additionally, a lot of the artists like to add a gradient using the multiply layer near the edges to make the transition a little smoother. This also makes the eye look more 3D and sphere-like. You can see in this photo reference, the iris is blurred out on the edges, not a complete hard edge, while the middle part is always a gradient. This combined with the pupils are a great way to add details. Usually the pupils can help with reinforcing expressions as well. Smaller ones are associated with high alert, fear, and crazy, while bigger ones portray innocence and affection. Lamb uses the pupil to add in all sorts of graphic patterns to the eyes, while in Chloe's case, they're not very emphasized. Actually, let's take a second here to look at how Chloe renders her irises because they're absolutely gorgeous. They look like rubies. And they remind me a lot of marbles with these patterns. I tried to emulate the rendering by myself. I will note that the liquify tool is really useful here to emulate that swirly marble pattern. You just want to make sure to curve them around like this to emphasize that 3D effect we have been talking about. A lot of it is just understanding how to render moist translucent objects, which directly ties into the next topic, lighting. The main shadow you want to know is the cast shadow from the upper eyelid and eyelashes. Most of the time they're simple shapes like this or non-existent like in Tsuki's work, but sometimes they can be intricate and detailed like in Ame's work, which shows up as reflections in the iris. Of course, you probably don't need to go this far unless it's like a mega close-up shot or something, but it's good to know. You never know when you need it. Editing rice brush here. I felt like this part of the script was a little dry and I didn't know what to add in, so I asked ChatGPT for help, and for real, I think GPT-chan is trying to ruin my career. Like, look at this. Hit subscribe like you're shading your final eyelash. Catch you next time. Absolutely horrible. Anyways, the highlights are placed on the iris depending on where the light source is coming from. The brightest highlights go on the direction where the light source is. So for example, if the light is here, then your highlights should be here. This is a direct mirror reflection of the light source. But because the iris is translucent, light passes through it, and this is why you always see the dark to light transition in anime eyes like this. Well, one of the reasons is because you've got that cast shadow, but most of the time the lights are placed above the character, especially if it's sunlight. This means that the light passes through the eyeball with this angle and causes this glow we call subsurface gathering at the bottom part of the iris. You see this especially in lighter colored eyes as well. Chloe's marble eyes demonstrate this perfectly, as you can see the subsurface gathering at the bottom of the iris, then highlights and any light reflections at the top. An easy way to recreate the reflections is to use a lighten layer with reduced opacity, then you carve in whatever shape you want for it. Together with the cast shadows and the dark gradient around the iris, this simple technique will make the eyeballs look more 3D overall. Wanke takes this up a notch by also doing gradients with soft shadows going across the sclera as well, giving the eyes a lot more dimension and realism. By this point, you should have a pretty convincing looking eye, and here's what I have right now. But it feels like it's still missing something. Whether it's a subtle highlight or a crazy pattern that defies the laws of physics, each of these artists have their own way of adding that final oomph to the eyes. Even if it's subtle in Wanke's work, the glow and the highlights are the things that bring the eyes to life. Color choices are especially important here because you often want a complementary color to contrast against the base of the iris like this. There's that hard eyes that surely everyone is familiar with, but smaller pupils like this actually stand out a lot as well, so you don't really need to add much here. We talked about the marble texture in Chloe's eyes, but rings around the pupils are also a popular choice. Just make sure that they're really subtle so they don't end up competing with the rest of the eye too much. Aside from the iris, which is obviously Lamb's favorite spot to mess with, they actually almost look like vinyl discs here. Areas surrounding the eyes are also a good way to add in more details. Makeup, tattoos, kanjis, and blushes are a good way to reinforce the focal point point even more. We talked about color choices earlier, but a good rule of thumb is to use no more than 2 or 3 colors and use the strong complementary colors very sparingly. You see in these examples by Lamb, even though it seems like there's a lot going on here, the purple and the neon is kept very minimal and intentional. And for Lamb, the iris is surprisingly simple, as in there's not much crazy rendering going on in the iris. If we compare it to Ame's work, for example, the rendering happens around the iris instead. You can see that the anatomical details are much more fleshed out here. The corners are there, the eye bags, even the eyelid folds are drawn out meticulously. And of course, eyes are just a part of the puzzle. If you struggle more with the face as a whole, I did a full video breakdown on faces here that you should definitely watch next. It covers everything from anatomy all the way to stylization. Subscribe.